I'm delighted and honored to introduce our audience today to Dr. Brennan Spiegel, who is the director of the CS Core program in California, and he's also a lecturer at UCLA. So Brennan, it's great to see you. If you could begin, please, we'd really love to hear just a little bit about your background, a little bit about your personal career and your journey.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. So I am a physician. I am trained in gastroenterology. So I'm focused on digestive diseases, but also trained in internal medicine. I also have a background in public health. I'm currently a professor of medicine and public health at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, and as you mentioned, at UCLA. And I oversee a lab that is focused on using technology to really broadly help improve human lives. And we use a wide variety of different technologies, most notably virtual reality and other forms of extended reality, and also other types of digital technologies like wearable biosensors and smartphone applications, and even social media analytics. So we have a number of different research projects focused on how do we incorporate these technologies into patient care to improve outcomes and improve the value of care.
Excellent. No, that's extremely interesting and very impressive. We love what you guys are doing. Obviously, here at Giant Health, we're about promoting innovation and doing what we can to champion the leaders of technology innovation for the purpose of increasing the adoption of new technologies to get better healthcare outcomes. So I'm sure our audience, who are quite literally many tens of thousands of people from around the world, are quite keen to hear more about this. Could you tell us, please, about virtual reality? If we could take a step back, obviously a lot of people are familiar with virtual reality, but just to make sure that we're not diving too far into the deep end too quickly, a little bit about the background of virtual reality, where it is right now, who's using it, and that type of thing, please.
Sure, yeah. Well, when most people think of virtual reality, they think of a platform for gaming and entertainment primarily. And increasingly, that is how virtual reality is being used. But long before the Oculus Quest came out and before virtual reality became a household term, VR was being used in psychology laboratories all around the world, and in military operations. For example, the Department of Defense here in the United States has been using virtual reality to help train fighter pilots, going all the way back to the mid-20th century, I should say, the 1950s.
Yeah.
So the idea of using VR for purposes other than gaming and entertainment goes a long way back.
Interesting.
But really, until recently, we haven't had access to affordable, high-quality headsets that we could actually use in everyday healthcare.
Yes.
And we've started to recognize that virtual reality has benefits in human health for managing everything from acute pain and chronic pain to anxiety and depression and irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, which is a condition I'm particularly interested in as a GI doctor, schizophrenia, eating disorders, the list goes on. And I've summarized it in a book that I wrote called VRX, How Virtual Therapeutics Will Revolutionize Medicine.
VRX. That's very interesting. You've listed a lot of, therapeutic areas and so forth there. Could you help us to understand what are examples of the connection? Again, I do want to make sure that our listeners from around the world can understand this. So we're always keen, if you will, to start from basic principles. So if people are thinking of goggles, if they're thinking of gaming, I understand completely the point you made, which is really valid, which is that, in fact, VR has been in existence and used and studied and deployed in a wide range of applications and industries. But thinking of something like, GI issues, how does one draw a connection between putting some goggles on your head and seeing something other than the real world and things like physiological issues in your digestive system?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that gets right at the heart of what we think is happening with virtual reality. It's no mystery that the brain and the body are connected. And this whole idea that the brain and the body are sort of separate and distinct entities is a holdover from the mid-1600s when René Descartes proposed dualism, which is this now largely discredited branch of philosophy, suggesting that the immaterial mind is sort of ported around the world by the physical body, and the two really are not tightly coupled. When in fact, we know that they are. They're entirely coupled. In fact, without a body, if you were just a brain floating in a vat somewhere, like in the Matrix, you wouldn't really be able to have any thoughts. You wouldn't understand the world at all. You have to have a body. You have to have muscles and tendons, an immune system, and an endocrine system, and all sorts of other systems in your body to inform your brain of what's happening. So really, the body is just an extracranial extension of the brain. It's the part of your brain that's not protected in the skull. So with that viewpoint, we now can begin to understand how modifying the body will, of course, modify the brain, but also vice versa. That if we modify the brain, it can affect how the body functions. And so for something like irritable bowel syndrome, we consider that to be a disorder of gut-brain interaction. It's called literally a DGBI. That's what we call it medically. We know that although many people with IBS have abnormalities, let's say, in the intensity of their gut contractions or bacteria, we also know that cognitive behavioral therapy works very well. We know that gut-directed hypnotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy are highly effective for helping people manage their symptoms. And so this is where we start thinking about virtual reality as a way to sort of amplify our natural abilities to manage our own sort of inner body systems.
Yes. Well, that's extremely interesting. So what you're saying clearly is that through the use of VR technologies, we are getting involved in how we manage our brain, or how we manage our behavior, or how we engage with the outer world in terms of our brain and our interpretation of the real world.
Both the world around us and the world within us. And so virtual reality, it has an ability to strongly affect, modify at the very least, how we perceive the world around us and the world within us. And so we can reliably modify that perception in a way that is positive and supportive and consistent with well-being. Then we now have this potential new therapy that could accelerate what Buddhist monks take decades to learn how to do by meditating, for example, and do it very quickly with virtual reality.
Yes, no, absolutely extraordinary. This is so interesting and exciting. Are you implying I don't have to retire to a cave with some Buddhist monks for 20 years to overcome some of my emotional problems?
Well, exactly. And so it turns out people have studied Buddhist monks in several different ways, and they average about 40 to 45,000 hours of practice to get to the point where they can turn their brain on or off. And this has been shown with functional MRI scans of the brain. So it's not an ordinary person that can just quickly learn how to deeply meditate. It takes a lot of practice, although people certainly can learn how to do it. But if you're in pain, if you're ill, if you're in a hospital, if you're vulnerable and in distress, it becomes especially challenging to access those capacities. We all have a natural capacity to imagine. That is virtual reality. You can imagine things in your mind that I can't see. You can hear songs that I can't hear. They're happening in virtual reality in your mind. So we all have this natural ability to live in virtual reality, but it's not always so easy to get there or to control those inner experiences. And so what VR is able to do, and we've seen this, is sort of level set the playing field and give people access to those capacities in a way that's much faster and easier. But still, we don't want people living in VR. We can still teach them how to regain or enhance those capacities and then use them in real reality without having to always be in the headsets.
Right. That's very, very relevant. I love how you just gave this analogy that, of course, we all have whatever you want to call it, a bit of virtual reality going on in our heads all day long already. Is that a challenge for you and the medical profession, where people might take an incomplete view of virtual reality and say, well, this is new, this is technology, this is interfering with how I live my life and how I want to get on with my life and how I view the world and how I manage my brain, my thoughts, my personality, my engagement with others. Is there a challenge there between what do you want to call it, the external aspects of virtual reality, technology, research, the work that you guys are doing, for example, and something which, in fact, as you're explaining it, isn't any different, but which might seem very different, which is everything going on in my imagination already?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot kind of packed into that question, so I'll try to unpack it a little bit. I mean, one concern, of course, people have is, well, is this a natural experience? Am I, going to devolve into some dystopian metaverse future like Ready Player One, where I'm replacing real reality with some virtual reality? Yeah. And this raises all sorts of interesting ethical, social, and truly philosophical questions about the metaphysics of reality. But without getting too deep into these very interesting discussions, because we could spend hours on it, yes, what I would say is we can diffuse some of the catastrophic thinking pretty quickly. People don't love to stay in virtual reality for long periods of time, the way they might playing a video game, let's say, on two dimensions. And partly because after about 20 plus minutes, people sometimes can get a little tired, fatigued, even nauseous. And so there's sort of a built-in reflex that people don't love spending, at least with our current headsets, long periods of time in VR. But more than that, in terms of what we're talking about today, the programs that we create and develop are purposefully not designed to be sticky, game-like experience where you just want to keep coming back. In fact, we keep them between 10 and 20 minutes per session maximum. And the design is to really help people get back to real reality. So we can go through lots of details at some point, but when we work people through an 8-week treatment program, for example, it is purposefully engineered to progressively build skills in virtual reality that then are purposefully and explicitly used in real reality with a smartphone companion app. And eventually the goal over the last few weeks is to graduate people out of the VR and bring those skills back into RR, right? Real reality. Yes. So yeah, this isn't in our view a Ready Player One kind of scenario. But I should end by saying this little section that the metaverse is certainly coming. It's inevitable that we will have a metaverse, whatever that exactly is. It'll be kind of a new form of the internet. And we have to understand that there will be dystopian corners, unfortunately, I have no doubt, of this metaverse. But now is the time for those of us in healthcare to develop, cultivate, and kind of protect some corner of this metaverse to support health and well-being in a positive and meaningful way. Yes,
exactly. No, that's an extremely helpful additional explanation. Thank you for that. The fact that you have a view about the, if you will, opportunities plus responsibilities of people in healthcare and the relationship between that and the impending metaverse, if you will. I do agree that the metaverse is perhaps something difficult to define. What are some of the challenges that you guys are ambitious to tackle regarding the view of the medical profession and new innovative technologies and applications like what you're doing with VR?
Well, there are many areas to tackle. Some of them are purely scientific. Some of them are more logistical in terms of how to implement these technologies in everyday clinical practice. And some of them are health economic in terms of who's going to actually pay for this technology so that it can be used in clinical practice. Yes. And going in order briefly on the scientific front, we now have over 10,000 studies. If you go into PubMed and type in virtual reality, you'll be absolutely flooded with studies. So the science is very mature. I mean, we now have multiple meta-analyses on the use of virtual reality for pain. So when people ask me, well, prove to me it works, I say, listen, we have multiple meta-analyses. We have probably more data that VR works for pain than for many of the treatments you use for pain. So The science is mature, continuing to mature. There's still lots of work to be done. But to me, that is not the barrier at this point. We have science. The next barrier then is how do we actually convert that science into clinical practice? And so this is an area we're thinking about working on and creating a virtual reality clinical service in our hospital here at Cedars-Sinai. We have the largest hospital in the Western United States, about 1,000 beds in our hospital. And we use virtual reality routinely on an almost daily basis throughout the hospital with multiple different partners, different departments and divisions and so forth. And we have a team that's involved with managing that VR. But then the third kind of hurdle here is beyond just the regulatory hurdle, which I also didn't mention, is the payment and working with insurance companies to really convince them that this is both an effective and cost-effective technique to support, particularly for pain management, but increasingly for a wide variety of other applications.
Right. That payment issue, I assume, is by virtue of the fact that this is fairly new in terms of approaches, interventions, compared to maybe other things which have been around for decades. It's not unique to VR, is it? The challenge of getting payment, getting on.
Sure. Yeah, I think what is unique here, VR, of course, is still pretty new in healthcare, although we're now measuring this in decades. So although most people are just now hearing about it, we've had research going back, literally decades, well before I had even heard of virtual reality. People like Skip Rizzo and Mel Slater and Walter Greenleaf, professors around the country and around the world who've been doing this work. So this is not a new idea. But what is new to, insurance companies, let's say, is how to figure out payment models around certain behavioral health interventions as opposed to paying for drugs or paying for procedures. So virtual reality is an interesting combination. It's a behavioral intervention, but it's also a technological platform. So what we're doing is we're combining a technology with a behavioral intervention. And then the question is, well, who's administering it? Is it a professional and should they be paid for their time, or is this self-administered at home? How do we actually value from, let's say, a third-party payer perspective in North America or the US in particular? How do we value the time that goes into administering this technology? And there are still evolving models that are being discussed right now for how to do that.
No, that's absolutely fascinating. When you talked about the fact that obviously it is a behavioral intervention plus a technology, touching on the technology very briefly, what are the implications in terms of data, the collection of data, data privacy, any other issues you'd like to highlight as this goes forward, which of course set it apart perhaps quite dramatically from a traditional, well, not necessarily traditional, but an alternative which has been around for longer, like perhaps taking a pill?
Well, right. Anytime we're talking about digital health, broadly speaking, not just VR or not just what we now call MXR, which is medical extended reality. That's the term that the FDA in the US now uses for this field, is medical extended reality. Whether we're talking about MXR, VR, AR, or just digital health broadly, we're talking about data acquisition and often data transmission. So, in the United States, we now have reimbursement codes for remote patient monitoring. They don't pay a lot, and not a lot of physicians actually take advantage of these codes, but there are ways right now to bill for the interpretation of remotely collected data. But of course, those data have to be collected under HIPAA-compliant channels and have to be secure. And this is, of course, a requirement now for any data system that's being used in healthcare around the world. So, VR is no different than that. One thing, though, that is worth considering is the biggest player in virtual reality currently really is Oculus, which is part of Meta, formerly Facebook. And that does raise privacy issues. I mean, it's no mystery that Meta has had its challenges with data privacy. I mean, that's part of its business model. And that's I guess, fine, but maybe not. Well, it may not be fine. We can debate that. But for healthcare, it's not fine. We can't have people's personal health information, moving through meta, where it can be exploited and used for profit. So in terms of healthcare, we need to think about alternative platforms unless and until Meta becomes interested in creating HIPAA compliant, environments where we can truly administer and prescribe MXR treatments that are regulated by FDA or EMA through an Oculus headset. Until such time, we need HIPAA compliant platforms. And the issue right now is that some startup companies what they'll basically do is send an entire headset that's kiosked with just their software program on it. And any data that's transmitted is through a HIPAA compliant channel. But could you imagine every time you want to download a new app on your smartphone, you actually need a new smartphone? I'd have 100 smartphones surrounding me. We need one smartphone with 100 apps. Yes. So we need the same thing soon with MXR is a HIPAA compliant platform. So we can download everything to one headset.
Yes. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, thanks for highlighting that. These data issues are extremely important and certainly not to be dismissed as a trivial part of the bigger picture. Hey, well, look, Brendan, we don't have too much time, so I hope you don't mind. We'll wrap up over the next few minutes. To be honest, I wish we could continue this conversation for about another 3 hours. This is extremely interesting, and we're very grateful for the fascinating insights and the incredibly intelligent and valuable information that you're sharing with us. So thank you for all of that. Maybe two more quick questions. And that is, number one, obviously, you're speaking here at European Health Tech Innovation Week. This is sponsored by Giant Health. This is a episode about virtual reality applications in healthcare. We're extremely proud to be championing the work that you're doing and to be highlighting everything in virtual reality as well as the CS Core program. This is being viewed by people around the world, and I only wondered if, from your perspective and the work you're doing at CS Core, do you have any asks? Are you looking for any partners from people around the world? What are some of your commercial objectives that a lot of people, perhaps outside of California and outside of the United States, may wish to contact you and explore with you?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me and for giving me the opportunity to share our work at Cedars-Sinai here in Los Angeles. And, I'm primarily a scientist, a researcher. So we have most of our research funded by the National Institutes of Health, or the NIH, federally funded research programs. But we also develop our own software. So we're very proud of the work we're doing, creating what we believe is best practice software for medical extended reality. And our goal is to rigorously and in some cases slowly, if necessary, test this software through traditional pathways like randomized controlled trials, right? And so we do have software. We certainly have people interested in licensing that software. And we have the capacity to create a variety of different software programs for many different health conditions. And so we did develop and publish best practice guidelines on how to create medical extended reality software that's freely available and on our website, virtualmedicine.org. You can check out virtualmedicine.org and find more about our entire program there. But yeah, we certainly are interested in testing new technologies, partnering with companies that have innovative technologies, and where appropriate, licensing our software to responsible partners who see the vision that we have to bring medical extended reality to the world and to really create that part of the metaverse that we all think can be of great value to humanity if we create it correctly and do it scientifically and responsibly. Yes,
exactly. Well, that's absolutely fantastic. So I certainly would like to encourage everybody who has dialed in and has been listening today to go to the website. Remind us once again of the URL for the website.
Yeah, so it's virtualmedicine.org. Simple as that. And then again, I have a book, VRX, which you can check out anywhere where books are sold, Amazon, etc.
Excellent. Okay. Hey, well, look, I'm so sorry, but we have run out of time. Honestly, I would have absolutely loved to continue this conversation. So on behalf of everybody from our sponsor, Giant Health, and everybody who's participating in European Health Tech Week, Brennan, we want to thank you. And this has been extremely interesting, really valuable, and of course, very keen to keep in touch with you. I hope we can track your impressive and successful progress and catch up with you perhaps at the end of the year for a further update.
Sounds great. Well, thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you, Brendan.